In 2011, we founded Potential Life. So we being myself and the gentleman on the right there, Tal Ben-Shahar. Many of you will know him. He's Harvard-based, one of the leading lights in the field of positive psychology. Now, what is Potential Life? We're basically in the happiness business. We're in the business of bringing the science of flourishing, or if you like, happiness, into organizations. Our idea being that if you have an organization full of on-fire, happy people, then you have the leadership organization for today's world. So that was the idea that we had back in 2011. And what I'd like to do with you today is share some thinking on how we think about the changing world of work and what the implications are of that in terms of leadership. And by doing so, we'll talk about the transition to AI, and we'll just talk about this idea of humanizing leadership as we make this transition. So let me talk about the changing world of work. Sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words, and just think how organizations have changed. Just look at this picture for a second. Go back, for those of you who have that much tenure, go back 20 years or 30 years and think back to the good old days. Organizations looked like what we have on the left side of this page. They were structured. People had clear role definitions. Those definitions sat into a system that we called an organization. It was predictable. It was stable. That world has gone. Because of technology, regulation, globalization, the organizations that we're in today look more like what we have on the right side of this page. Now, there's lots of implications, and the reason why Tal and I got together is that when we speak to organizations, when we were speaking to organizations and asked them about their pain points for this world, people always talked about the same types of needs, the same types of attributes, words like, we need people who are empowered, we need people who are collaborating, we need trust, we need authenticity in interactions. We need people who found their mojo. We need purposefulness. We need self-regulation. We need smart risk-taking. It's a whole different type of set of attributes to the set of attributes that we're used to seeing in the former world. And so if we go back to this old world and then think about this new world, what's required here is an attitudinal shift. We need to go from a world where, when we thought about leaders, we needed leaders of change. Leaders of change. That's what we used to need. Think about, I used to belong to a thing called a Change Leaders Forum. The implication being that we had leaders of change. Because we're in a system and we're driving through change. I think we need to rethink this for this new world. And not talk so much about leaders of change, but talk about leaders in change. Just one word, but a very big difference in terms of what we're talking about, because it's placing the center of gravity back on the individual. The question isn't what are you driving, the question is how are you operating? What's your attitudinal set so that you can succeed in this world? Now, this transition is part of a bigger transition. Does anybody know what this is? Has anybody heard of the Henna Hotel in Tokyo? Has anybody been there? No. So Henna actually means strange in Japanese. And this is a hotel where they have replaced 95% of their staff by robots or by robotic experiences. So for example, when you check in, you're greeted by a hologram that does the full check-in experience. Not necessarily a humanoid hologram either, by the way, as you can see on the right side of this page. And then when you go to your room, you're accompanied to your room by a robot porter. Now let's just dwell on this for a second. I'm sure you have your own experiences, your own versions of the robot experience, but just think for a second about what this means for us. In a world where any work task that is codifiable or is repeatable will ultimately be done by a robot. Let's just reflect for a second on the nature of the work that will be left for us. For that work that is left for us, of course. Just think about that for a second. What is the nature of the work that's going to be left for us? And the conclusion that we're coming to is the stuff that's going to be left for us, in inverted commas, is going to be the difficult stuff. It's the stuff that's going to require judgment, the stuff that's going to require creativity. In fact, it's very close to those words we had on the page before. And so there's an important message here, is that as we transition to this world, we're going from a world where the human element was a nice-to-have add-on to your work tasks, to a world where the human element becomes the very essence of work. So Tal and I, when we created Potential Life, we were thinking about this, and there are three important implications for us. Three big implications. The first one is this attitudinal side of leadership is taking center stage. That's one way of saying it. In other words, being human is going from nice to have to being the very essence. The second implication is everyone is concerned by this. There's no reason why leadership is the reserved domain of the leaders. We need to think differently about this. And I'll give an example, a very inspiring example from me in a few minutes. So this has raised some interesting questions. What is the method that allows you to develop? And I just put 20,000 in there. It could be 700,000, depending on your organization. But what is the method to allow you to create 20,000 of these people who are being more human at work every day? And our third implication was traditional methods, teaching approaches don't really work in this world. You know, the concept whereby you put somebody in a room, and of course we've all been put in rooms. I've been put in a room many times in my career, and I'm sure you have too. And you'll have a facilitator that has this talent for working you up into a frenzy. And then on Friday afternoon, you're filling out the evaluation form, but by this point, the Stockholm Syndrome is set in, and you don't want to disappoint your captor. So of course, everybody's giving everybody 10 out of 10, declaring victory and going home feeling fantastic, right? And then you get back to work Monday morning and life carries on. So traditional teaching approaches don't work. We need something different, and the difference is we need to see the difference between teaching and between behavioral change. The science of behavioral change is actually a different body of science. In other words, and this is sort of a cheeky way of saying it, you can't think your way to leadership, or you can't think your way out of trouble here. So these are our three big implications. And what I'd like to do now is I don't really have time to sort of elaborate on all of this. I'd like to focus on this first part. What is this attitudinal side of leadership that we're talking about here? And so I started off by saying that we're in the happiness business. So my co-founder, Tal Ben-Shahar, spent many years at Harvard. He's known, actually very well known in India, and he's known as Mr. Happy to many people. He's one of the founding fathers of the positive psychology movement. And I find it very interesting that positive psychology as a scientific movement was only founded about 25 years ago. If we go back 25 years, psychology until then had been focused on resolving internal conflict. In other words, dealing with various forms of mental illness and sadness, if you like. Resolution, either through medical or analytical forms. And the founding fathers of positive psychology said, hang on a second. It's a bit quick to assume that happiness is simply the absence of sadness. On the contrary, happiness is not the absence of sadness. There is a science to happiness. There are degrees of happiness. Happiness can be codified. And what Tal and I said was, in this new world, which is fast-moving and somewhat chaotic, each and every one of us in this room, has the choice to bring a different version of ourselves into work every way. In fact, into every aspect of our lives every day. So which version do we bring? And what we're saying is an organization could do no better than encouraging people to be flourishing. So if you have an organization full of flourishing, happy people, then great things are possible. You have a leadership organization. So the first thing that we did was to consolidate this existing body of research. We did not need to do our own primary research. Luckily, I'm not a scientist. Tal is, he's done his research. But what we did was take an agnostic, let's integrate what the science of flourishing is telling us, and then make this accessible for each of us. So what I'd like to do is present this to you in a sort of a rapid-fire way, because I think it would be nice to have some time for Q&A, especially as you have some apps, I think, and you're able to, don't quite know how it works, but we'll figure that out, and we'll be able to ask each other questions later on. So, I'm going to start with the story of a lady who I met in a supermarket in England called Sainsbury's. Some of you will know this if you've been to England. Her name is Lydia. She's a real person, and if you're visiting London, come and see me, and I'll introduce you to Lydia. Lydia, she stacks shelves in the Sainsbury's in Cromwell Road in London. I was visiting this store, talking to the store manager. And the store manager said to me, go and have a chat with Lydia. So for no more than 1 or 2 minutes, I went to see Lydia, and I had in front of me this wonderfully, wonderfully warm, authentically warm, engaging person. I felt that I had all of Lydia's attention. And I just wanted to keep on talking to Lydia. It's a wonderful conversation. So I thought it was a bit strange that the store manager had me go and talk to Lydia. So I went back to the store manager and said, so that was nice, but what's that all about? He goes, oh yes, Lydia, let me explain. So he says, Lydia stacks shelves. But when we have a customer who's angry, let's say the product is broken or something wrong with the bill, he says, we know what to do. We have protocols. You know, here's the protocol for something wrong with the bill, and here's a protocol for broken product. And of course, we do all of that. But he says we notice something else. When we have an angry customer, if we have Lydia just go and chat to that customer for a minute or so, oftentimes the problem just kind of seems to go away. So Lydia, she's standing on her ladder, stacking shelves, but she has a roaming and roving role. She's got her eyes open in the store, a bit like me right now. She's looking out for things that are not quite right, angry customers. And when she sees one, she gets off the ladder, she goes, and she does a little 2-minute magic. What's really interesting is when you ask Lydia, what's your job? She doesn't say, I'm stacking shelves. She says, I'm helping to create this customer-satisfied environment. What you see with Lydia is, I believe, a beautiful encapsulation of what this humanized form of leadership and flourishing can be in an organization. And when I was speaking to the CEO of Sainsbury's and telling the story of Lydia, he goes, we need 160,000 of those. Just imagine. Just imagine. So let's break down what's going on with Lydia, because you probably noticed there was a lot of you probably sensed that Lydia was playing to her strength. She was this strength of warmth and empathy. She was mindfully engaged. She had a sense of purpose about what she wasn't just stacking shelves. There was something bigger than that. She was doing something more noble than that. So there's lots of good stuff going on. So let's break this down. And the way I'd like to do this, by making this clear distinction between leadership and flourishing, is to present 5 domain areas. Strengths, health, absorption, relationships, and purpose. These 5 things, very neatly making the acronym SHARP. Let's talk about strengths. And let me ask you a rhetorical question, because I know you know the answer. What do you think will help you improve the most? Knowing more about your strengths or knowing more about your weaknesses? Shout at me. Of course you know. So why is it that the vast majority of people in the world, as polled by the Gallup organization in 63 countries, answer weaknesses? Why? Shout at me. Why do you know the answer and yet everybody else doesn't? Don't be shy. Did somebody say conditioning by any chance? Yeah, yes. There's an awful lot of conditioning. Starts at school. When I was at school, I was terrible at English. Still not very good at English. I was good at maths, went on to study maths. But you know what? All of my school years, all they ever bothered about was how to fix Angus's English problem. And boy, that makes you feel anxious, yeah? And you keep it with you. Conditioning, I need to fix the things that don't work. We all have our own versions of this, of course. The thing is, the science tells us a very different story. Not only is that frame of reference wrong, it's totally wrong. If you're going to do something special in your life, if you're going to knock the ball out of the park, in whichever way you define it, then you have to be spending some of your time, not all of your time, some of your time, playing to your strengths and your passions. Strengths is what you're good at, passions is what you like doing. Thing is, do we know what our strengths are? Most of us don't really know. I'm talking about character strengths here. Do you dare to use them? Well, it's difficult if you don't know what they are. So there's a real journey to be had for all of us here. But it's a real performance multiplier, and it really enhances our life experience. It enhances our self-confidence. My daughter, who's now 20, you'll see a photo of her later on, she wasn't so good at school, and her brother was good at school, so there's a bit of sibling rivalry going on, and her self-confidence was quite drained. But it turned out she's actually very good at ballet. And we noticed that being good at ballet had a real positive effect on her school results too, because it made her feel good about something. And they're sort of strengthened to be able to confront the school challenge. So playing to your strengths is a massive performance multiplier, and the organizational evidence is very compelling too. Organizations that have people who answer yes to this question, organizations that help people play to their strengths, perform substantially better. So this is strengths. And so in summary, in terms of leading self, it's about playing to your strengths and passions. In terms of leading others, it's about tapping into complementary power strengths in teams. Let's move on to the second of the 5 things, health. In fact, let's start with stress. Stress is a problem, isn't it? Stress is everywhere. Every country I go to, everybody's talking about stress. Even in do we have any Australians in the room? No. Even in Australia, they have lots. I don't get it. What's the problem? Just putting another prawn on the barbecue or something. But so everybody's stressed out. So stress is being held up as this big problem. However, the countervailing view here, this is what the science tells us, stress is good for us. We need a different frame of reference. Stressing the organism, intrinsically, of course, there are boundaries, but stressing the organism is a good thing. It's like going to the gym and stressing your muscles. You strengthen yourself. The problem is somewhere else. Of course, there is a problem somewhere. The problem is lack of recovery. We need a positive framing about stress. We need to get rid of this terminology, work-life balance. Because work-life balance demonizes work. Work is a thing that stresses you out. It's bad for you. Do less of it. More of the other stuff. Hang on, there's just as much stress at home than there is at work. At least there is in my home. I don't know about yours. So there's lots of stress everywhere. There's lots of recovery area. We need to embrace recovery. And the point here is we need to take responsibility for managing our energy levels. Energy isn't given to us in our DNA, tempting though it is to think that when you see a colleague or a cousin who just seems to be overloaded with energy all the time. You say, oh, aren't they lucky they've got so much energy? It's not luck. We can all do stuff, physical stuff, sleep, nutrition, exercise, emotional stuff. Those sneaky depleters. Have you ever had a 15-second interaction with a colleague that's had the effect of draining all the energy from your body? I think so. If you have a day where you have 5 of those, you feel pretty drained when you get home, right? If only you were able to anticipate this, manage this, find a way around this, just think how your energy profile could be different, and just think how you'd be able to embrace stress as a positive. So what we're saying here is, when it comes to health, we have to take responsibility for our health, for our energy levels. And when we think about team environments, we have to be thinking about how we're positively injecting energy into those team environments. The third area is called absorption. Absorption. This is about being absorbed. I'm going to show you a photo now. This is my daughter when she was 2. She's now 20. Isn't she wonderful? She is. She still is. When she was 16, a bit more tricky, but she's nice now. I'd like to think she's mindfully engaged in me. Look at her. Doesn't she look as though she's in, you know, where children kind of put their finger in your nose and stuff and all that sort of stuff? Wonderful. Now, my wife and I, we rediscovered this photo a few months ago. We'd lost in the family albums, and we were looking at it, and I was thinking back to, it was a long time ago, and I was thinking back to that time in my professional life when I was working really, really, really hard. And it was obviously in the summer in the mountains, and we were just kind of recreating this image. It was probably a Sunday afternoon. It was probably about 4 o'clock. And I was probably getting ready to go back down off the mountain to go back to the airport. And so while my daughter was engaged in me, I'm not sure where I was. Actually, it's actually quite moving. So we all have a choice. We all have a choice to mindfully engage at every single second of our lives, including things like eating your breakfast. Conference calls. What's wrong with conference calls? What's this? The mute button. Aren't they horrible? Ever been on a conference calls with 12 of you on this call? One person's talking, 11 other people muted, kind of doing a bit of email. Or was that Facebook? I don't know what it was. Anyway, it definitely wasn't really listening. And then you get called. And you go, oh, sorry, can you just repeat the question? The line's really bad. And then you have 11 other people muted, and you're talking. That's anything but being mindfully engaged. It's such a driver of personal productivity and, of course, life experience. And it's so important for leadership. If somebody's talking to you, and they may even be looking in your eyes, but you can sense that their mind is elsewhere, it's not a nice way to be led, is it? No. It's not nice at all. This is a muscle that we've lost. Our telephones, among other things, are to blame. We've got used to being distracted. We've lost the muscle. We no longer know how to sit and read a book totally uninterrupted for an hour. We just can't do it anymore. We don't need to read any more books on this. We just need to get on with it. So all those books that are sitting on your bedside table around various forms of mindfulness, chuck them out. You don't need them. Just get on with it. Apologies to any people who may have authored such books here. Getting myself into trouble here. So absorption is important. And in terms of leading self, it's really about being more mindfully engaged in what you're doing. And in terms of leading others, it's really about how you're listening properly to people. The fourth one is relationships. And so here, the important thing is to recognize that the world of work, go back to how the world of work has changed. We're now in multiple fast-moving overlaying networks. That's our current reality. You have your university network, you have your work alumnus network, you have your religious network, you have your sporting network. We all have so many networks. And so we're all actors in networks. So the question is, what is it that distinguishes those people who are good at this? And I want to share with you two things here. Positivity and authenticity. Positivity. How much positive energy are you leaving behind you in this network? And secondly, authenticity. This is how true to yourself are you being? Where's it? How much of a facade is there? Some of us think that there's a trade-off between positivity and authenticity. If you're in a face-saving culture, there's a kind of an assumption that if I'm going to be positive and I need to be authentic, then I'll privilege being positive at the expense of being authentic. That's kind of what face-saving is. Some cultures are passive-aggressive. In many ways, that's neither positive nor authentic. Some cultures are driver cultures, where you're very strong on the authenticity, but maybe neglecting the positivity side of things. So we all have an opportunity to be both positive and authentic, and we all need to keep practicing and learning this. And then, by the way, just a word on psychological safety. So what's really important when it comes to innovation, and we'll have a breakout on this later on, is, and Google's done a lot on this, actually, but not only. If you want innovation, then you have to fight against the implicit fear of a sanction the first time the first thing goes wrong. Now, it may not be real sanction, it may be just a sense of sanction. But if that's in place, then people don't even bother. The remedy to this is a thing called psychological safety. It's not just about any old form of forgiveness, it's about a set of boundaries that allows people to feel safe. It's very important. The fifth of the five is called purpose. And actually, I'm going to just talk about how, when we get home from work every day, and you say, why did I bother going to work today? What's the spectrum of answers? Now, hopefully, you have plenty of days where you go, that was a day. This is what I meant to be doing. That kind of response. But of course, we all have days where you probably don't ask the question, but if you were to ask the question, why did I bother going to work today? You might say, well, you know what? I do this because this is how I pay my rent, right? Which is an answer. It's just as much an answer as the this is what I meant to be doing answer. It's just a totally different type of answer along this spectrum. How are you viewing your work? Is it a job? You're doing it for the pay packet? A career? You're doing it for progression? Or a calling? There's something bigger than you. There's a big 3 sign there, which means I've got 3 minutes left. And so what's going on here is, and the science that's been done around work orientation has basically led us to understand that we all have real scope to influence the meaning we find in our lives in general and in our work in particular. And the idea here is one of reframing. Do not wait for meaningful things to land in your lap. Do not look for activities with meaning. Rather, look for meaning in your activities through reframing. Take the 5 most utterly meaningless things you do at work and reframe. Find the positivity in them. You'd be surprised. And what we're kind of summarizing up is here, we need to go from a tendency to spend lots of thinking around eternal questions such as the one that's written here, and we need to do something a bit more pragmatic and replace of by in. We're looking for meaning in life. We can do this, and it helps massively. So these are these 5 things together in a summary. I think I have a nice summary chart here. These 5 domain areas, which sometimes I spend a whole day going through this, so forgive me for the sort of breakneck speed of this, and there's now 1 minute 53 to go. But these explain most of the variance of what you see when you see flourishing people in today's world. And what we're doing at Potential Life is helping organizations move the needle at scale on this. So this is not just about helping 5 people, it's about helping potentially 10,000 people through a technology-enabled process that we deploy that allows companies to really change culture. It's not about teaching, it's about behavioral experiments. I don't have time to talk about the change methodology here, and if I did, it would definitely start to look like a Potential Life sales pitch, which I won't do. What I will do to finish off is to go back to those 3 big implications that we talked about, and just move forward to one more slide, and say that if you'd like to pursue this conversation in any way, there's a few things you can do. First of all, Tal and I have published a book called The Joy of Leadership, and we really go into some depth around the science behind all of this and how we think about this. So, of course, we would recommend you read the book. You can also reach out to either myself or to Tal, and does anybody want to ask a question? Yes, hi.
My question was the last bit about purpose.
Yeah.
How would you take the team through finding meaning or purpose in what they're doing as a culture?
Yes. So there's basically you have the joining of usually two things. Most well-organized firms have some kind of statement of why we do what we do, which is an intention to provide meaning to people and to customers. There's no reason why any employee necessarily connects to this. But if you help them connect, they can make steps towards this. So the important thing is at the level of the individual, often to their strengths. Very often, if I get to play to my strengths, then that actually gives meaning. So that could be one step. And then the level of the team, what is it that we're doing as a team that fits in? And so just by building up the building blocks is the way we do that. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, myself, Dr. Neerav here. You shared about the attitudinal data and all.
Yeah.
So do you think that the attitudinal data helped Mr. Matthew Ricard to be the world's happiest man in that context?
Yeah, so Mathieu Ricard is many of you know him, is the happiest man in the world. And actually, when you measure his brain, the side of the brain that's associated with happiness is physically bigger than the other side. So his brain, he kind of walks around like this. Yeah? The way that Mathieu lives his life, in terms of meditation, in terms of focusing on small change, in terms of your actions inspire your reflection as much as waiting for your reflections to lead you to action. All of those elements of change philosophy that certain philosophies, including in India, have been practicing for 5,000 years. This is the same philosophical underpinnings that you see here. So there are different ways of viewing positive psychology. Some people say positive psychology is a codification of good philosophical practice for the last 5,000 years. I'm not sure the religions would necessarily appreciate that way of seeing it, but that's how some people see it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.